Hi, my name's Issa. I'm a team member who's working on Tenderfoot Tactics. If you didn't know, Tenderfoot Tactics is a turn-based tactics game where you control a party of goblins and their elemental abilities to cascading repercussions. I just wanted to show you a quick combat scenario and take you through some of the systems in Tenderfoot Tactics. Without further ado, let's start a fight. So you can see here my party of 6 goblins is a fairly early game composition. I have 5 ferals, and then down here the goblin in the red cowl is an archer. You can see on the right here there is the turn order track, which I can just rearrange by clicking on portraits and dragging them around. And I can grab my goblins in the battlefield and readjust them to my liking, which I will try and take a little bit of advantage of this higher terrain with my archer and send my melee units out here into the open field. There, now that I'm happy with that configuration, I can begin. So if you take a look at the battlefield, you can see various heights of the terrain, these vegetation, these large blooms of bushes, which if you hover over a goblin, you can see its movement range, which will be completely swallowed up by these heavy terrain, these difficult terrain. So you can see that these bushes present obstacles, and in addition, the terrain will swallow up your movement to a less dramatic degree. And you can also see in some spots darker and lighter soil saturation. We don't have any groundwater or any fire, but those together sort of represent the simulation of combat in Tenderfoot Tactics. Terrain is shifting, plants are growing and creating difficult terrain, water is finding a new level, and fire is burning. If you want a particular snapshot, right now I'm not moving, and so the simulation is paused. So at this moment I can hover over any one of these squares and look to the bottom left here to see this banner, which gives a summary of what exactly is going on in that square. So for instance, you can see this bush right here that I'm looking at from the bottom to the top is at -3 height, 0 groundwater, 5 soil saturation, 9 plant matter, and 0 fire. On top of that, when I start to move my goblin, you can see a circle pops up right below the banner in the bottom left with an 8 in it, and that demonstrates how much simulation time will pass while I'm performing this movement. So you can see it sort of changes as I extend or shorten the movement of this goblin, and that will give you sort of an idea of how long the simulation will run while my goblin is taking their action. So together, the banner and this tick timer will give you something to get a hold of to understand what's happening across the battlefield. And you can just sort of also watch the battlefield and see how it unfolds and try and develop an intuition on your own. So without further ado, let's actually get started. I think I'll just aggressively move forward and try and create a line for myself. You can already see a few turns have passed. This lower area, this lower flat area, was fairly empty, but already plants are starting to encroach. And so that's something I'll need to consider as difficult terrain starts to pop up. And you may have noticed that unit, now in the 10th position, casts a water spell, and you can see, looking at the banner, that there is small amounts of water here, and the simulation has paused, but as I move, you can see the water saturate into the soil and go to the lowest point on the map. Fortunately, my paths are fairly clear right now, but I can see that unless I'm careful, I'll be boxed in. So, as you'd expect, the archer has quite a bit of range. They can't hit anything near them, really, but they can hit much farther than any of my other goblins. And an element that you haven't seen so far in the simulation is fire, so you'll see this arrow deals a decent amount of damage, but also adds fire to a square, which, as you can see, can be quite damaging, but quite uncontrollable. So I'm looking here for something with high vegetation, but low moisture. And we'll see if I get lucky here. So I got a little bit of fire, but let me pause there. So you can see I collected a little bit of fire. All the vegetation is gone now. There's just a dead bush. But I removed all the moisture here. So if I ended up trying to light a fire on this same tile, I would have a much better time, which we'll see next time I get a turn for my archer. We'll see if I can take control of the low ground here and hopefully surround these knights on the high ground. Otherwise my archer will be isolated by themselves, which they don't do very well alone. I'll heal myself. And try and make some space. So you may have noticed that if you hit an enemy when they're facing away from you, if you hit them on the flank, it will cause unnerve 1. If you hit them on the back, it'll cause unnerve 2. And those knock you down in the turn order. So in this case, hitting this unit on the flank will knock them down from turn 6 to turn 7. And now that my turn has ended with this goblin, I can choose which way to face them. And so I need to sort of decide what is the best way to create a defense and protect that goblin from being unnerved, which if a unit gets surrounded, they can quickly be unnerved until they haven't had a turn and just lose all their health. So as I was saying earlier, you can see the low ground now is completely covered in difficult terrain, and it's just swallowing up all my movement. So I'm going to try and create some space for myself, maybe take some high ground. And as I said, my archer now is quite weak and very exposed. I think I'll have to really retreat. And it's quite risky, but it could be worthwhile to get a fire started. Unfortunately, no luck again. There's still too much moisture in the soil. And I'll try and get some units to support my archer, but as you saw, going uphill is incredibly taxing. So, a little earlier I just described facing, and the facing unnerved dynamic is present among all units, but there are a couple of abilities, which one I'll show you right now, Strangle, and you can see it'll double the damage from behind. So in this case, this unit is facing away from me. It has 55 health, you can see, and normally the most damage I could do is 40, but with them facing away from me, I can take advantage, do Unnerve 2, not that it matters, because this unit will be dying now. And so there are a few abilities that sort of expand on the facing dynamic and sort of take advantage of having units facing certain directions. So now I'm in pretty good shape. Actually, I've sort of taken the low ground, and I could start to use my grenades. Instead of just doing AoE damage, I can start to clear out difficult terrain and pull down these cliffs to make it easier to assault the higher position. However, I'm also fairly low health, and I can see that this unit, which has an AoE heal, will be coming up soon, so I'll sort of assemble my units to take advantage of that. But also my concerns from earlier were coming true. The knights were able to push back my archer. I have a little bit of support. And we'll see. I'll have to take low ground with this archer just to have any chance to protect them and do what damage I can. Fortunately, I have a healer here, and I can maybe put them out of the way to draw the attention of the knight. And again, I'm just going to keep using grenades so I can start to take on these enemies from the side. And this enemy unit is fairly low in the turn order, so I don't have to worry about them too much. That healer is causing me trouble. However, you may have seen that healing spells can create. There was actually that goblin, while the knight had passed, it has a passive opportunist ability where it attacks enemies that move through adjacent tiles. So that was some luck. Although the knight is still quite sturdy. Going back though, you can see, you may have noticed that healing spells, you can see like this canticle song here, it can create 2 vegetation if there's enough water in the soil to support it, which I'll actually be doing that right now to heal my units. But what can happen, you can see there the soil saturation was so low that it wasn't able to produce new plants, but it can create new vegetation. And in that case, the vegetation grows and starts to become really out of control, as well as pulling moisture out of the soil, making it very easy to burn. So I'm hopeful that that plant growth made it a little easier to start a fire. Unfortunately, it looks like the cliffs are so chaotic that there's not a ton of plant matter next to each other. And again, I'm just going to keep going with my grenade. It's great for bringing terrain down to my level, but also clearing away all this troublesome brush. And now I have much easier access. I can start to cause trouble from behind. This healer is a real pain, though. I need to get rid of them. I'll get rid of this lingering unit. And you can see now that a unit has died, they've dropped a cloud right here. That experience cloud you can collect. So right here, this unit can walk right through that experience cloud. If you collect the experience cloud, it will give you the experience as well as a little bit of health. If the experience was enough to level you, which almost certainly it's not right now, it would completely refill my health. So if you have some really aggressive goblins that are pulling away from your pack, getting too far from your healers, you can use the experience that your enemies drop to collect. So fortunately for me, this enemy knight is really oblivious to my goblin with opportunists, so they've basically killed themselves. And now I can get my archer back on some high ground and start to harass these last two units from both sides, which you can get the sense that with consecutive unnerves, a unit will just not be able to act until its health is slowly whittled away to zero. But I need to put a stop to this healer because they've been keeping these knights alive for far too long. So now they've taken very high ground. And I do have an advantage in units, but I still need to be careful because their health isn't great. And I'm fighting from the low ground. Although fortunately I have my archer. Ah, there we go. So there was finally enough vegetation and little enough water that a fire has started, and let me just end that turn. You can see the simulation is paused, as I said, but right here you can see a fire level of 9, vegetation of 8. So the fire will tear through all that vegetation and continue on and on and on, which I need to get these units out of the way, considering their extra low health. I could use first aid to heal my unit and try and protect myself a little bit, but you'll notice first aid in the bottom left will take 24 ticks of simulation time, which is more than enough to get the fire raging through my units. So I'll move them out of the way first, then use first aid. And you can see the fire pretty much has a clear path to completely surround the arena. However, now that it's burned through this little corner, I'm in okay shape. And again, I can keep accosting the high ground with grenades, reducing that advantage, and doing some damage at the same time. You see here, this melee unit, I can attack 3 directions, but I can't attack uphill to this knight, and that's because the cliff is so high that I just can't reach. So that is also another concern with high ground, is melee units sometimes just can't cover the distance. And now my units are actually in pretty bad shape. I haven't gotten this knight completely surrounded. Again, because I'm having to fight back up this high ground. Fortunately, my archer is really pulling their weight now. And this unit is in perfect place to end the fight. And any XX experience that was left behind will be collected and split evenly between my goblins. So if you liked what you saw, you can find us on Twitter at Tenderfoot_tact, T-A-C-T, and from there you can find a link to our Discord. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it interesting.